your sense of work is the thing that you have to get done in order to live the rest of your life is even reflected in our language of like work-life balance, as if life is everything that happens outside of work.
Welcome to the At Sea podcast. I'm your host, Justin McRoberts. My guest on episode 8 is author and journalist Katelyn Beaty. Christianity Today made Katelyn the first female managing editor in the magazine's 60-year history. She also happened to be the youngest managing editor in that same time span. Earlier this year, she released her first book entitled A Woman's Place, a Christian vision for your calling in the office, the home, and the world. Most of our conversation focused on that book, which I found not only insightful, but timely. This podcast puts you in touch with great culture makers because I believe what they do deepens and enriches our lives. What strikes me most about Katelyn is the way she handles somewhat onerous and technically nuanced cultural ideas by keeping those ideas in close proximity to human narrative and very often her own. So if authority is best used, as we discussed in our conversation, to create room for others, Katelyn exemplifies that practice by letting her story provide room for people like you and me to more fully identify and flourish as human. One note before you dig in order to give this conversation more space, we excluded the musical interludes you may have come to expect during previous episodes. I'd love to know what you think of the longer, more seamless conversational format. Check it out.
I'm assuming that this is just like we don't need the video option.
No,
it's
God,
just audio. Yeah.
No,
okay.
I'm in my pajamas, so I'm assuming, I'm pretty much just assuming anyone I interview is probably
Has
in their
not gotten
pajamas as well. So
for the day.
That's sort of,
Yeah.
that's my assumption. In all honesty, I really, really enjoyed your book, and it was not only, and I say this is on like a personal note, it was really timely for me in my life and the things that I'm being moved into, and I'm needing language for, as part of what we get into in the interview. I'm needing language for this expression because I'm not trained at it. That's like part of what we'll get into in the interview is like how does a man who is in a position of power actually go about doing this? And your book was just really, really helpful, and not only just because it's really well articulated, but because you are, it seems to me, really conscious of male readership of your book as you're writing.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I accept that probably a majority of the readers will be women, but certainly I've hoped from the beginning that men would read the book and engage the ideas, because I think these decisions take place in conversation with men, either in a relationship, in marriage, or in the workplace, right?
Yeah.
So, or in a church context. So they, the ideas ultimately have to reach men for there to be like real change.
Yeah. Well, now I don't expect you to remember this, but we met a number of years ago, very briefly, at a party.
Yeah, at the Festival of Faith and Music.
Yes, it was. We were at it was somebody's house, and it was a very brief conversation. And what I remember, because those situations are almost always, regardless of the context, like those kinds of parties are always so like kind of like there's so much posturing and bravado and one-upsmanship. And I remember, and I distinctly remember you not participating in like the bravado and posturing, and like, no, it was like you were listening. Like you had this like kind of like and not in like some weird sort of passive or even some like sort of weird stalker creepy way, but you were in this, I remember noting like she's actually just paying attention and listening to people, and she's not waiting for her damned time to insert her opinion. Is that sort of you? Are you just like is that your normal posture as a person? Do you primarily listen? Do you find yourself being kind of a listener?
Yeah. Well, I've certainly done my fair share of posturing and one-upmanship in different professional contexts. But yeah, I think that one of the reasons I like being in journalism is because you get to get paid to basically listen to people and ask questions.
Yeah.
And I've just always had a real like curiosity streak. And so I like a couple times people have said like, you're asking too many questions. Like I feel like interrogated, but yeah, I just enjoy like hearing other people's stories and kind of getting a context for them, you know, and kind of being able to place them. So yeah, I'm glad that was encouraging to you in that. I don't remember I honestly don't remember that much of what we talked about, but, yeah, I don't want to, and plus just people who dominate conversations drive me crazy. Yes. So I don't want to be that person.
Yeah. See, I am more naturally that person. Like that's, I mean, hell, I have a podcast now. Like that's like,
right.
Like part of like an outpouring of that like aspect of me. Like I would like to dominate this conversation, but like learning to be primarily a listener. Like that's a
and a podcast
set.
is a good practice in that. Like, cause it's not just you sounding off, it's you in conversation and dialogue.
Yeah, that's the hope. Absolutely. I'm trying to position myself to like listen well and then pass on what I hear. But anyways, I remember that really distinctly. You that was where you went to school. You went to school in Michigan.
Yeah, I went to Calvin College.
What did you study when you were in college?
I was a communications major with an art history minor. So that has not come into day-to-day play in my work at Christianity Today. But yeah, I was really involved with the student newspaper. And I don't know, do you know Ken Hefner with the Student Activities Office? Yeah, he was a mentor, and I worked for that office for a couple of years, like promoting the concert lineup and helping with one of the first festivals of faith and music. So yeah, I had a wonderful experience there. Like I grew up going to public school and just going off to college. I really wanted the faith learning integration. I never had that before. And Calvin was a really good place for that. So,
and that culture specifically under Ken is really like, that is a listening practice. Like his whole thing with bringing bands in is, we're not going to bring bands in that are going to deliver what it is that you are wanting or expecting. The goal of this is to learn to pay attention. Yeah.
Like he would have some of the students who worked with him just get together and listen to an album, like from beginning to end, no conversation. And that's so hard to do. I don't know if it's harder to do now, just in terms of how our listening habit, like our music listening habits have changed with digital music and Spotify and kind of streaming services. But that was so revelatory. And I still think about that, just the practice of listening. And I think the artists who come to Calvin notice a difference when they play. Like people are really engaged. They really are listening to me. They're paying attention. And that's, what else do you want as an artist but to be heard and to be seen? So I'm deeply indebted to Ken.
It was definitely my experience of music growing up was you sat and it was an LP. It was vinyl. And so I mean, if you stopped it, you'd have to find the same groove on the record with the needle and all that kind of stuff. So it was like top to bottom. You would listen to a whole, the Kiss. I was part of Kiss Army. I don't know if you know the whole thing, but like the band Kiss, their fan club was called Kiss Army. I was part of Kiss Army. Okay. It was phenomenal. It was a good time in my life. I wore some makeup as a young child, but regardless, you get the vinyl in the mail, and it was an event. We'd put the record on, sit there, and you would listen to it top to bottom. The only interruption was like when you got to end of side A, someone had to voluntarily get up and go flip it over. But besides that, everyone would just sit and listen, which was it's a really different experience. It was a very different cultural experience for sure. Yeah,
and you see people, I think, with the rise of vinyl, you see people wanting to reclaim that listening experience. And also it's just cooler to have like, a record player than it is like an MP3 player now. So
not super efficient, but really cool.
Yeah. So I'm sorry that I don't know this, but are you performing music on a regular basis, or are you recording music? Or I know that, music is part of what you do.
Yeah.
Or it has been in the past.
It is a part of what I do. It's a smaller part of what I do now.
Okay.
Some of which is just like seasons change, people change. There's a 90s song about that. And I'm a 42-year-old white guy, and there's a point at which like me with a guitar just doesn't have this, just doesn't have the same whoop about it as it did previously. But also like I over the course of years, I fell more in love with the storytelling part of what I do. And so even as a singer-songwriter, I love writing songs. I love the performance connection thing, but all of that really like started to take a back seat to the storytelling, which just felt like a more direct relationship. Like I did stand up a little bit, in my kind of later teens and early 20s, and what I realize now is how much like that direct connection. I don't have anything to hide behind. It's me and the stories I'm telling or the jokes or whatever, and then a group of people. And it was just sort of this, I don't know, a different kind of intimacy. I think I've fallen back in love with that. So I'm writing more and doing more this kind of a thing. I led a thing this morning with a group of people without a guitar, just a kind of a prayer exercise. So yeah, like it's evolved. I still love music. It doesn't pay for anything. That's for damn sure.
Right.
Like there's no money in it for me anymore. So I do it because I love it, but I think vocationally I've just evolved a bit.
Yeah.
Did you expect? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Did you expect to be? So, like you were studying journalism to some degree. You were sort of. Did you expect to be in the world of words? Did you kind of fall in love with words at some point? There was sort of part of your bio was like you realized at some point you fell in love with words. Was there kind of a seed of that, or was there a moment? Was there something you read? Like, why are you a words person now?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think that probably emerged pretty early on in college when I realized that I loved writing research papers, which is
that's so geek.
Not what you lead with at a party.
No.
But I really enjoyed the research process. Like learning in and of itself is very energizing for me, and it can be about a whole range of topics, which is probably another reason why I was asking you all those questions at the party, was that I just wanted to like gather information.
Yeah.
And then I really enjoyed like taking that information and putting forth an argument from it, or picking up themes or kind of developing my own ideas through paper. So that was part of it. And then also just really starting to write for the student newspaper. I wrote several opinion pieces about things going on campus or concert reviews, and just seeing that people were actually reading them and coming to me and saying like, I'm really glad that you wrote that. I've been meaning to, I want to have a conversation about that, and seeing how writing could actually shape and affect a community in a neat way and get important conversations going was really energizing for me too. So I think that was probably where I realized like words can be very powerful, and they can be used for good or ill. And I want to use them for good. And so I've tried to do that in my time at Christianity Today as well, just in terms of writing editorials or essays, like speaking a word of challenge or clarity to our readers, and then obviously hoping to do that too with the book. So people sometimes ask like, are you ever going to write fiction? And I'm in awe of people who write fiction.
Agreed.
Like who like create and come up with things that don't exist.
Yeah. Yes.
Like I don't understand that, but I'm in awe of it.
Yeah.
I think if I write another book, it'll almost certainly be like a nonfiction, argument. Like you don't want me to sit down and try to write, Lord of the Rings style writing.
Right. No, I agree. The folks who create worlds, and do it well, where there's sort of like you can actually maintain that sense of being in that world for, 200, 300 pages. I know I don't have the sort of the creative DNA to make that work, but I'm also positive I just don't have the attention span. Like there's not a chance I find a world I've invented interesting enough for 300 pages. Like I write songs, I'm done in 3.5 minutes, finished, moved on to the next thing. So
right. There's kind of a set like timestamp, like, okay, I'm going to create something for 3.5 minutes,
yes.
and then we can jump to another world.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, and to make it coherent, I think like even just like organizationally, a work of fiction is like astounding to me.
Yes.
Just I would be afraid of dropping threads or like introducing characters and like, just have it be incoherent in addition to like not that interesting. Like if I wrote a novel, it would look exactly like my life, and like the lead character would be named like Kate or something.
Like a not so veiled memoir. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's fiction, kind of. I mean, I was wearing blue that day, and I said in the story that I was wearing red. That makes it fiction.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Was there do you remember books that you loved? Did you grow up as a reader?
Yeah. My mom was a children's librarian during until I was like 12 or 13. And so
cool.
We just had a lot of books were always a part of our family routine. We read books before we went to bed. I remember getting stacks of books from the public library as an 8-year-old over the summers.
Yeah.
And I loved like every other, little girl. I loved Anne of Green Gables and Little Women and the Little House on the Prairie stories.
Yeah.
I remember reading the Chronicles of Narnia, but that was before I knew about all the Christian stuff. I just remember liking it as stories. Like I didn't really grow up in a Christian subculture. And so we had the Chronicles of Narnia, but there was never like, I didn't get the reference to Jesus,
Right. Yeah. It was just a neat story, and there was a pretty cool lion in it, and that's neat.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. And then in like junior high and high school, you of course read a lot of Shakespeare and Huckleberry Finn and some of the classics. And I'm really grateful for that kind of education. I feel like there's still so many classics that I haven't had time to get to. Like I just haven't, I've never read Anna Karenina. I've actually not read the Lord of the Rings trilogy, which is embarrassing.
Wow.
Yeah.
Gosh. I feel like someone needs to kind of check you at the door and say, like, I'm sorry, we can't do this authorship thing until you finish this trilogy.
Exactly. I've only read the first 2 Harry Potter books, so that's a source of shame in some circles.
I haven't read one. I have literally not read a single Harry Potter book.
Yeah, I think part of the reason I couldn't get into them is because the first 2 books are really basically children's books, and then the series gets more complex and darker and more complicated, and like the characters just become more interesting the older that they get. So I've heard I need to push through to the 3rd book, but so I am actually I'm in a season of transition, and so I'm going to have more time on my hands.
You're going to take up the Harry Potter challenge.
Well, yeah. So I want to like, in addition to cooking and getting 8 hours of sleep, I also want to like read Anna Karenina. Like this is the time, to really delve into those like 800-word classic novels that you feel like you never have time to delve into.
Yeah, totally. I totally agree.
So
yeah, I was an English major, so I got all that stuff, for the 4 or so years that I was in college, just slammed with, you're going to read this entire novel and then this also entire novel, and you have until 3 o'clock this afternoon. I got all of that stuff. So
you probably have some good recommendations.
I don't know about good. I do have recommendations. I'm also like a huge comic book nerd. And I really I love graphic novels now. One of our first guests on the podcast was a guy named Gene Yang, who's one of my favorite writers. Do you know Gene Yang?
I just know about him, and I think Christianity Today is going to do a profile of him very soon. But I have not read his work, but I've heard that it's very good.
It is tremendous. He's one of the guys one of many. He and like G. Willow Wilson, who's another brilliant writer. They're just tremendous writers, and they give credence to the art form of the graphic novels, because it's this other thing for nerdy kids, but no, it's really not. It's just beautiful. It's a beautiful art form. I love it. I'm a huge fan. So yeah, my list of recommendations would kind of range from, like Marilyn McIntyre's, Caring for Words, to American-Born Chinese, and the most recent Ms. Marvel series. So it's sort of, I'm sort of all over the place.
Yeah, that's eclectic.
It is eclectic. Your book, like I said earlier, is just, I really, really enjoyed it, and it was really timely for me. And it's a book that, entitled "A Woman's Place," which is a provocative-ish title. We were sort of like drawing folks into like anytime I mention it to folks, like a woman's place, and everyone finishes. Not everyone. About 70% of the people I say, yeah, a woman's place, and someone will crack the joke, "It's in the kitchen," and which is what it's supposed to do to some degree. It is a book to a great degree about women and about a woman's place, and I want to get into sort of it as something of a response to Sheryl Sandberg's work, which is also a brilliant piece. But it also strikes me as a book that is, as much as anything, it's kind of like a theology of work. That more broadly than just the role of women in vocation, it really is this. I don't want to call it an attempt because it sounds like you didn't get there, but really is this like because you do get there. It's this broad re-examination of what it means, what work means as an element of humanity. And you say things like, work, it seems, is a fundamental way to preserve the dignity of all people, regardless of how much is in their bank account. That you tie work to this kind of human value and identity. Can you talk a little bit about that, like work as a human distinctive?
Yeah. So, well, I think you're right that I at least attempt to give a theology of work for women and men alike. So probably accepting that most people coming to the book are either women or like very deeply invested in issues of women's identity or gender, but also hoping that anyone could flip to chapter 3, which is where I really get into, a distinctly Christian vision of work and find something valuable. So I'm very grateful to hear that you found it valuable. Oh, yeah. And I really root that in the Genesis narrative. So from the very first pages of scriptures, we get this vision of God as a worker, which isn't something that I've heard a lot in churches throughout my life, but God as a creator and a worker and, a being of industry. And then also very early on in scripture, we see the first humans invited to both image God, to bear his image together, but also to tend and rule over creation, over what he has just created. So there's something about humans' interaction with the created order, whether that's like the literal physical, aspects of our world, what we might call nature, but also like human culture, like cultivating human ingenuity and working with creation to develop things that weren't there before. All of that is such a crucial, fundamental way that we bear the image of God. And all of that, like tending and stewarding creation, is industry. It's work, And so I think as modern Americans, we think of work as just the thing that we have to do to get a paycheck, to buy the things that we need in order to survive. Or we really emphasize like positions of power and authority and rising in the ranks, that would kind of be a corporate vision of what it means to work. But I think scripture and the Christian tradition give us a very expansive vision of work that includes things like, making a meal at home and feeding your family, or let's see, like even writing a piece of music, or like cleaning up a beach for like a cleanup project. Like all of this is part of tending and stewarding the creation. So I think there's a tension in the description I give, because that's that's like very, very broad. It basically just sounds like any human activity. But then of course I did want to address the professional work that most of us will do. And I really wanted to, I think especially for women, help them see that, the work we do in an office or a classroom or in the boardroom is all part of bearing the image of God as well. And kind of trying to break down that like sacred, secular divide that I think a lot of us still operate with.
Yeah. And it is a broad enough kind of sweep, but it's tied together with this. And you actually just got to it when you said, you talked about work as not as something we do just to survive. One of the way you wrote in the book, you say that no human, male or female, was meant to live a life full of leisure and free of industry. And that's like, it's like, yeah, that's a really simple, like, of course. But then the way even I think about work, it is or tend to think about work, or maybe have been trained to think about work, is that it is something to escape from eventually. Like that it's that in a sense, I mean, this is maybe an overly pointed way to say it. The work is for poor people. That the work is something that poor people have to do because they don't have enough. It's just a work of necessity for those who are trying to get by. But if I had enough, I wouldn't work, and that's kind of somehow like this odd kind of misinterpretation of what it means to be human. Is that somehow the goal is leisure. And you flip that on its head and say, no, actually, meaningful work is part of what it means to be human. That's kind of this inescapable identity root. Yeah.
Yeah, like I don't think Kim Kardashian has a rich and full life because she never has to work a day in her life. And for other reasons, not to pick on Kim, but
I think she'll be okay. But go ahead. Yeah,
yeah, she's gonna be all right with me picking on her in this podcast.
Did you hear what Katelyns said? I'm so pissed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like I think your sense of work is the thing that you have to get done in order to live the rest of your life is even reflected in our language of like work-life balance, as if life is everything that happens outside of work. Whereas ideally we're finding a lot of life, a lot of meaning and connection and fulfillment and pleasure, God's pleasure in the very work that we're doing. And there's tension here too, because there is privilege wrapped up in that. Like, is it fair? Does it make sense to ask like the sanitation worker to find meaning and fulfillment and God's pleasure in his work? But maybe that just reflects our disdain for manual labor, and it's not so much about privilege. But yeah, I think the language of work-life balance that a lot of us use and operate with suggests kind of a faulty view of work, as if it's the thing that you do. I mean, another way to say it is like, and this is another 80s or early 90s song, like working for the weekend. Like, you work so that you can enjoy yourself in excess, like on the weekends. And I don't think that's ultimately what God intends for us, for any image bearer. And yeah, I think that is only pleasurable for so long. That's only gonna be fun for so long. And then, I think that's why like the stockbrokers who work 100 hours a week and then they can like totally blow like $1 million over the weekends or whatever, are like actually fundamentally unhappy because they don't actually enjoy the work that they're doing during the week. They don't find it meaningful or fulfilling or connected in any way to who they are as an image bearer. That
there's work and then there is life. That there's like the work is that life is the stuff you squeeze in between your work hours, kind of a thing.
Exactly.
There's a guy, I don't know if you knew Gary Vaynerchuk at all, but he's this kind of a entrepreneurial coach, and part of what he goes after, he does these Monday morning videos, is that if you can't like be excited, or if you're not excited about or kind of find some meaning or value in the work you're doing, Monday through Friday, and in your mind you're like, well, at some point I'm going to get to do meaningful work, his thing is like, if you don't practice that now, if you don't go into the work you're doing, almost whatever it is, almost regardless of what the work is, if you can't develop a kind of a pattern of like having value and some level of excitement, like I'm going to crush this job now, then once you get to the thing you want to do, you're still not going to enjoy it because you're going to turn it back into work and somehow separate that from your passion and from your life. And I love, like, you actually really dig into that. And the line from the book, you say, can we start by ditching the phrase work-life balance? And like, instead of saying like, hey, how do I achieve a work-life balance? You're literally saying, can we just nuke the concept? Because it's just it's not helping anybody.
Well, the other reason, and this came up a lot in interviews that I did with women for the book, is that work-life balance so often feels like you're just choosing to feel inadequate in two areas of life at once. Like you can never achieve the balance. You're always, if you're focused on work, you're neglecting your home life. If you're focused on home life, you're neglecting your work. Like I think the language of balance creates kind of an unattainable, like, sense of life satisfaction, where if you use language like integration, it feels a little more freeing. Like I have all these different components of my life, and it includes professional work, but it also includes, friendship or marriage or church life or volunteering or recreation or vacation or what, travel. And each needs its time and energy. Each is something that I'm dedicated to, that I'm investing in intentionally. And when I'm investing in it, I'm choosing to be fully present for it for the allotted time.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to live like that, right? In part because technology keeps us kind of distracted in so many different directions all at the same time. Not to blame everything on the iPhone, but
we can blame plenty on the iPhone. That's
yeah.
fine. There's plenty of blame to go on the iPhone. And again, like Kim, it can handle it.
Right, exactly. Yeah. I don't think I'm going to take down Apple's stocks in my comments.
I think they're going to be okay. I want to ask you to reach back in your brain a little bit, and insofar as we're talking about work, do you remember early jobs? Can you think of worst job you've ever had? Do you have a worst job you ever had?
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, I mean, you're ready with this right away.
It's on the tip of my tongue. I
love it.
And that was, I worked at McDonald's for 3 months.
I love that you made it 3 months.
I know. I don't even know how I made it 3 months, especially because I was on the breakfast shift, so I had to get there at 6 a.m. and then work until 2.
How old were you?
I was 18. So kind of your classic quintessential high school job.
First job.
And I was also, it wasn't my first, but it was among the first. And I was also working at a family-owned pharmacy part-time and just needed to make a little bit more money. And that was actually a great first job. That was an awesome setup. But yeah, it was just, it was bad in all the ways that, working at McDonald's would be bad. It's kind of gross and dehumanizing. And you were literally just you're just there to move strange food products from one place to another.
Maybe that should be the tagline. McDonald's, moving strange food products from one place to another.
Exactly.
That seems incredibly appropriate. And I don't think it would change anything. I think people would be like, great, cool. Can you move some of that into my mouth, please?
Yeah. And we got free, you got a free meal. If you worked a shift, you got a free meal. And I'm ashamed to think back on how much I ate, how many Big Macs with extra sauce I ate that summer.
Can you extrapolate? Is it possible to reach back and potentially do the math, even funny math? How many Big Macs are we talking about?
I'm guessing at least one every 2 or 3 days.
That's over the course of 3 months. That's a lot of Big Macs.
Well, it didn't have any effect on me at the time because, of course, my metabolism was awesome. And that's, right. If I did that now, we'd have some serious health problems.
Yes, you'd be writing a different book.
Face.
Yeah,
yeah, exactly. But yeah, that was definitely the worst job for sure. And I also got locked in a freezer at one point.
Is that real?
Yeah.
Did you, did they do that on purpose, or was it like that you just weren't liked? Like, what happened? How do you end up locked in the freezer?
I wasn't like making enemies at McDonald's, but it was just a mistake where I was responsible for like getting the patties. And of course the patties are not fresh. They're frozen.
Right.
And like someone just like closed.
I should pretend like I'm shocked. Wait, let me try that again. The patties aren't fresh? Are you kidding?
Yeah, it's a huge scandal. Yeah, like if people only knew that.
Yeah, I love that. If people only
knew that
the
food at McDonald's wasn't fresh.
Yeah, hashtag
and, like,
we know we don't care. Yeah.
Right.
So how do you end up in a freezer locked in there?
So yeah, I just had walked in to like, and had been in there for a few minutes, and there was kind of this back section behind like those like really weird plastic curtains, and someone just like had come in and gotten something and then shut the door, and I couldn't figure out how to open the door.
Oh my God.
And so I'm like banging on the door, and someone comes along a few minutes later and lets me out.
But for a stretch there, it was like it was like an episode of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., where you're just sort of like locked behind this door, and there is no hope for you. You're going to freeze to death.
Yeah, I really like it did cross my mind of like, okay, this is my end. Like, you know, teenage local girl gets frozen, dies by freezing at
McDonald's.
McDonald's.
It would have been.
Yep.
Well,
yep.
Making a name for yourself on the way out, though.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
exactly.
then the subheader is Patty's not fresh. Yeah.
Also determined Patty's not.
McDonald's exposed. Fresh. Young girl dies. Right. Patty's not fresh.
You know, I'm actually resenting that this didn't happen, because just the headline would have been so
amazing. Great. The fact that there would be another like wonderful like story about female tragedy that would have been trumped by something else. Like just another opportunity for us to flip it.
Yeah.
It's good.
Yeah.
So one of the things you that pops up in your book a bunch is the clear influence that Andy Crouch and his work has had on you and your worldview. And specifically, I mean, Andy Crouch writes quite a bit like about power and authority, which is definitely a strain throughout your book about the exercise of power and authority as a woman. Can you talk about what it looks like? Like, can you talk a little? I guess maybe sort of like 2-layer question here. Can you talk about the influence of Andy's work and how that like what you're borrowing there that informs you, and then like I'd love to get into talking about the ideas and the practices of exercising power and authority specifically from the perspective of a woman.
Yeah. So I've had the privilege of working with Andy for 5 or 6 years now, and of course have read Culture Making when it came out several years ago, and have just followed his work and his thinking over the years. And so he's been a mentor to me, and actually has, you know, on the theme of power and authority, has really empowered me in my work at CT. And I think what that means, I mean, there's a way of talking about empowerment that can be like silly or just kind of a cheesy tagline. But I think what that means is that he has noticed, you know, natural giftings or insights that I have, and made space for them to be exercised and to flourish. So I think the really great model of power that Andy puts forth, both in his thinking and his book, Playing God, but then also in his relationships with other people, especially in the workplace, is, you know, giving up a form of power in order to empower others. So it's a kind of power that is always making space for others.
Yeah.
And so I have in my time as managing editor, I've tried to do that with my coworkers, with the people who write for us. I mean, you know, the putting together a print magazine is literally about making space for people to have a voice and to be heard and to be given their own form of power and authority. And I think, you know, in a Christian vision of these things, there's never any risk in giving up power. There's only more to gain the more that others are given. You know, there's always more space for others. it's only in kind of a broken world, which of course we live in and grapple with, but it's kind of in a broken vision of power that if you're in power, I don't have power. Like there's only so much, there's only so much room at the table. And, oftentimes the loudest or the strongest are at the table and the vulnerable are not. Yeah. But, in terms of like leading as a woman or having power as a woman, these obviously that makes some people nervous or like, well, what do you mean by power? But I really think, and I take heart in just the belief that part of what it means to bear God's image, like part of what it means to be an image bearer is simply to have authority. I mean, God gives Adam and Eve authority over the garden together. And we see other images, both in scripture and then in Christian history of women stepping into, positions of authority or influence and really making powerful, differences for the kingdom. And I don't think those are just aberrations. Like, I think that God really does, grant specific women power and authority for specific times and places. Obviously, Esther would be the most clear, like one of the clearest examples that we have in the Christian tradition. So, but honestly, also, so I want to say that, like, that I find a lot of encouragement in distinctly feminine visions of power. But at the same time, in my day-to-day work, I actually don't know that I lead or exercise power in a way that's fundamentally different from my male colleagues. Like there's one way to edit well, or there are several ways to edit well, but they're not contingent on your gender. Like either you add in like the right adjective or you don't, like, or you make something clear and more concise or you don't, or you communicate meaningfully to your colleagues or you don't. And so it matters. And then it, in some other way, it doesn't really seem to matter. Like in my day-to-day work, I often just feel like I'm a person who has been given a fair amount of leadership and authority. And I don't know that it would look that different if I were a man, but it's hard to say. I can only live out my calling as a woman, but I don't experience it as highly gendered or feminine in a day-to-day way.
So part of what that takes me to is for me in my personal journey as a Caucasian male and in a person of privilege, there are these parallels. So when you talk about like you are a person and they're among other people, and there's a way to edit well or etc. The part of the question I end up coming to feels a little bit like the questions I have about as a white person, like how do I responsibly deal with or engage with race issues? Because what I've learned, obviously, over the course of a few decades now being alive, but is that it's not a matter of color blindness. That the whole idea, because that was the goal initially, was like, it's color blindness. No, I need to acknowledge the blackness and brownness of my sisters and brothers and say. So there's also this. I'm assuming as I move into these spaces, a way to I don't want to ignore the femininity or the womanhood of the person next to me. So can you maybe talk about what it looks like for a man to be empowering and encouraging without making it some sort of like I'm helping you out, hand up kind of a thing? What's it look like for a man in a work setting to be empowering, to be encouraging? Because there is kind of a responsibility of those who are at the table to, like you said, make room. I mean, as an exercise of authority. What's it look like to make room for women? Or maybe it's like this. What's it look like for you, for the men in your life, to make room for you in a way that doesn't feel like you're being treated differently as we're trying to not treat you differently?
Right. Or like, hey, can you speak for all, we really want to know what women think about this. So can you speak for all women?
Do we have one around? Is there a woman around? We can get the female perspective.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of it, and I think when I think about times when I have felt the most like seen and heard and encouraged by male colleagues, so much of it is in like nonverbal communication. Like, do you like look me in the eye when we're having a conversation? Are you letting me get complete sentences in before interrupting me? Like, or are you not interrupting me? Are you asking for my feedback? Not as, hey, can you speak for all women? But like, what do you, Katelyn, think about this? Like, is this a good decision? What are we missing in this decision? So I think a lot of times what will happen in a room where most of the people around the table are men, and of course this also intersects with race, is that there can be a presumption of permission to like the men sitting around the table don't have to ask for permission to speak up and give their thoughts and even like interrupt each other.
Yeah.
Like they can come in and are secure in their position of power and authority simply by the fact that they are men, or in a large part because they are men. Women often don't have that same luxury, especially if they are in, they're sitting around a table where the majority of the people are men. Oftentimes, there's this tightrope of, I don't feel empowered to speak up. I certainly don't feel permission to interrupt or to lead the conversation. And yet if I try to overcompensate and really force myself in and speak up, I also don't want to be perceived as pushy or bossy or inappropriate. And so it's really hard to manage that. And I just in reading and in conversations with women of color, there can often be like kind of a double bind in that regard too. You don't want to come off as angry, quote unquote angry or pushy, and so, but in terms of what men can do, I think just making space in a conversation, like really listening and not taking credit for your colleagues' ideas.
Okay, good. Yeah.
But that seems like a fundamental human kindness rule, but also especially if your female colleague has come up with an awesome idea and it's her awesome idea, make sure that she gets the credit.
Yes.
So it's things like that. But I think, most of the women that I've talked to want to be treated with respect and want to be treated with kindness. And, I think it's just an intentionality that men have to develop.
So would you say that, like, if you were, let's just say, as a random example that doesn't have a ton of cultural resonance right now, let's say you were running for president and we were in a debate. If I was to interrupt you, let's say upwards of 70 times, you would consider that disrespectful? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, like in a hypothetical. This is could never really happen.
No.
Like in our lifetime.
And I can't ever see a moderator letting that go down that way.
Right, but let's say he did, or let's say the moderator was a he and he did let that happen.
Yeah.
Well, it was interesting. Well, I think what was interesting in terms of the reaction to the debate was how many women saying, I know exactly what that feels like. Yeah. Like I have experienced exactly what Hillary Clinton is experiencing right now. Like, regardless of whether you agree with her policies or her proposals, or you think she would be a good president, or whatever you think about Donald Trump, like the vocal patterns in that debate were indicative of ways that so many women have felt interrupted. Like, just as a metaphor, they have felt interrupted as they are trying to be leaders or to have effect or impact in the world. Mm-hmm. So, but to be honest, I mean, at the end of the day, I think she ended up looking better because she was actually able to, for the most part, maintain her composure and kind of power through being treated like that.
Yes, she also had things called answers to questions, which are helpful when being asked questions about things.
Right.
Just, I mean, that's a philosophical principle. But insofar as there are questions,
it's a very obscure philosophy of like having ideas and answers to questions.
Yeah, it's something the Greeks played with for a little while, and then it's kind of trickled down a little bit.
Right.
Speaking of the Greeks, that's the crazy transition, but it actually kind of worked. Your book is chock full of scripture reference. You're speaking from the perspective of a Christian person. One of the early events that we did as an at-sea organization was this evening centered on the role and the authority of women in culture. And we hosted Sandra McCracken, who's a singer-songwriter, and a gal named Susan Bonilla, who's a local politician, and then a pastor named Sarah Walbrecht, who's a brilliant pastor and theologian. We didn't mean for the alliteration thing to happen, but it totally did. It was Sarah, Susan, and Sandra. And it was like, sorry, I don't know how it went down. It's just something that happened. And one of the unique questions that Sarah got as a pastor was about the predominantly male nature, or apparent nature at least, of Christianity. That God is God the Father, referred to as He. Jesus is the Son. The Holy Spirit, like sort of this somewhat sexless, genderless, but also regarded as He. The disciples, 12 of them, male. Paul writes most of the New Testament. He's a guy. So in that, so it's really easy to then think of how should I say, the role of women as kind of a secondary consideration in a Christian context, as like not necessarily so much an afterthought, but almost a peripheral issue insofar as that's the way it seems the culture is built. How do you, as you approach the scriptures, as you approach the Bible, like, are you bothered by that? How do you find a context for yourself as a woman in a religion that really does seem to be predominantly about the male?
Right. Yeah. And that, that would be like the primary feminist critique of Christianity is that it's ultimately patriarchal, exclusionary to women, only interested in keeping men in positions of power and authority. I think I take heart in having gotten a bit better grasp on kind of the historical contexts of different scriptural passages. So, for example, looking at, so Jesus had 12 disciples, they were all male. Look at how he interacted with women, though. Like, look at how radically inclusive and human his interactions with women were, especially given the time and current, in cultural and religious divides of the time, his interactions with the Samaritan woman, the fact the woman who's pouring oil on his head and anointing him, and he's receiving this and praising her in front of all these men, for her faith and for her service to him. So there are these pretty, like, if I had to defend Christianity to, a secular feminist audience, the first thing I would point to is Jesus. That something about his interactions with women are radical, and it's actually God in, if the Christian story is true, it's actually God in Christ, like touching women, being friends with women, including women. And so I take a lot of heart in the Gospels for that. And of course, Paul says some things about women and women's roles that have created problems, I'll say. But again, looking at the historical context, you do see women playing a financial role in the backing of like the spread of the gospel. And you see Paul praising them. And you also see Paul kind of implicitly saying that women are going to be in the church. They are going to be part of spreading the gospel, even if their roles or their public face is going to look different from men's. But then also, and maybe this is like too charismatic for some Christians, but I look at specific women today who like clearly have the gifts of the Spirit, who are doing very powerful work, for God within the Christian story. And I look at them and don't think it's a mistake, like that there's an empowerment. There's just with some of the women I'm thinking of, there's something beyond herself and her own abilities that's like guiding her life. And I take heart in that. I don't think it's a mistake. I don't think it's accidental. So I look to those women too, to say like, there are women who have found a way to kind of live within the bounds of like historical Christianity, more or less, and seem totally empowered and totally free as women to live out the gospel. And if they can do it, I can do it too.
So you're taking into account. I mean, part of what I hear you saying is that there is this maybe like literalist reading of the scriptures that kind of disallows that. That if you just take it as this, that you actually have to take into account the time in which the thing is written, which isn't so much to strip the scriptures of any particular authority, so much as it is to give a particular writing its actual illumination. That insofar as Jesus is actually speaking with a woman, what we make of that has to have some resonance with the time in which it's written. And that as John the writer points out, when Jesus is speaking to this woman in the middle of the day, like that wasn't supposed to happen. And we end up making a lot about because she was a Samaritan. Yeah, but she was also a woman, and and she becomes this witness to the person of Jesus, etc. You're taking into account that like there are these moments, and certainly they are fewer to some great degree, but the fact that they exist at all in that text was and is and should be taken somewhat radically, or more radically than we take it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even even the fact that, I mean, like going back to the story of Esther, or the fact that, the first people to come across the empty tomb are these women who loved Jesus, and, Mary, and I forget who else was there, probably Martha, but like the women were encountering the empty tomb and then going out and telling other people about the empty tomb. Yeah. There's significance there. And obviously Christians of different theological bents would disagree about its significance. And, kind of would point to the fact that, well, yes, but the disciples, like the people who Jesus, the 12 official disciples who Jesus chose were men, and there's significance there. But I don't think you can ignore these pretty striking examples of women basically preaching the gospel, like in their time, which is very radical given the constraints of their time.
And if you want to take the story at all literally, the first witnesses and the first storytellers with regards to the resurrection of Jesus were in fact women, and then it took it took men hearing from women, and it's such an incredible cultural parallel. I mean, they tell the story first that Jesus is risen from the dead, and none of the men believe them. That there had to be that, like, it took a while. Not only did they see it first, not only did they preach it first, but the men didn't believe them initially. And I agree. There is something significant to be read there if I'm in a posture and a place to actually receive that. If I'm going hoping to not see the role of women because of what that might mean for, leadership in my own religious community, then sure, I can dodge that. But if I actually want to take the story seriously with all its nuances, you really have to, you've got to account for that.
Right.
Actually, I'd love to land the plane with this.
Okay.
I hesitate to call it my favorite part of the book because it's actually a pretty heavy part of the book, but it was the most striking part of the book is your encounter with a friend's family tree, and in the book, kind of like after a good chunk. By the way, I mean, for listeners, I mean, you really should make the time and spend the money and pick the book up and get like some time with this book and investigate it deeply. It's tremendous. It really is. Towards the tail end of the book, you talk about this encounter with this family tree, and you've spoken about like your role in the workplace and as a woman, and you are dealing with an engagement that was broken off and talking about singleness, and there's this kind of weight to this moment of the book, and then you encounter this family tree, and it sort of does this. Can you actually, I'll do this. Can you just talk about for a little bit your encounter with the family tree and what you saw there with regards to fruitfulness and stumps, singleness and womanhood?
Yeah. So this was a family tree that hung in the living room of some dear friends who used to live in Kentucky, and another friend and I were visiting them. And I'd actually seen it before in their home when they lived closer to me, but when I had the first time I saw it, like I just thought, oh, that's really pretty. The second time I saw it, it was after I had gone through a broken engagement. I was a little bit older. I was starting to think about like the reality of biological limitations in terms of having children, and which, by the way, I don't like need to worry about that, but it's something that I think a lot of people have in the back of their minds, just in terms of thinking about what will happen in their life and kind of their life plan. And I just started to notice as I was looking at their family tree for the second time, and it's very big, and it goes back like several generations. I started to notice these little stumps on some of the limbs. So, on most family trees, like it keeps growing and growing when people have kids, but then there are these specific little stumps, and it would say like, Stephen, 1896 to 1911, or like either it was clear that their life had been cut short, like they had died, like unnaturally early, or that they just never had children. Like they had never had offspring. And because they had never had offspring, they literally were stumps on this tree. They didn't have any fruitfulness or continuation represented in the tree. And the reality is that like the natural human way of things is we exist because of the people before us, and the people after us exist because of us. And so we are biologically connected, and we have spiritual and biological impulses to be part of that continuation. And so, and I think, that's true for all of us or most of us, but I think maybe especially for women who have the unique capacity to bear life with their bodies, there can be this unique poignance around not having children. Like my body is supposed to be able to do this thing, and for whatever reason I can't, or I haven't. And so I started to really come to terms with that. And obviously, like the Christian story blesses and considers beautiful, like the human family tree, like, spanning generations and generations. And yet there is this vision that we have in the Christian story of a kind of fruitfulness that actually is not just about biology, but it's about being part of the family of God, which is not ultimately it's not just rooted in biology, but it's also rooted in grace. And so people who, being far away from the Israelites, not being connected to the heritage of the Israelites being grafted in to the family of God because of Jesus. And so we have this image, we have this vision of a kind of fruitful life that's not just about bearing children and not just about passing on your biology, or DNA, I guess that's what you would call it. But we don't, at least in my current context, I live in a community with a lot of young families. And so it's easy to kind of forget that. It's easy to forget that vision. Like having children becomes not just normal, which it is, but like normative. Like there's something wrong if you don't.
Kind of standardized.
Yeah, standardized. And so it's easy to feel like a stump, like I'm not doing what all my friends are doing, And so I felt like I did have to include a chapter on singleness in the book, or kind of, a vision of a single life, because I wanted women as well as men to be encouraged to see their work as part of the way they live a fruitful life, whether or not they have children. I think women especially can feel like, professional work is good up to a point, but then like once I have children, I'm going to move into a totally new stage of life. I think we sometimes believe like I'm going to become a new person when this happens, and I'm going to give up the work that I was doing in the past. And I understand like some people just have to do that out of necessity and out of practical constraints. But yeah, I think that can leave women who don't ever have children for whatever reason feeling like, is the work that I'm doing now, does it matter? Like, does it matter in some ultimate sense? And I want to say like, yes, it does. So yeah, that was a lot, but your listeners should just go read the book to learn more. I totally agree.
They absolutely should. Well, thank you. I mean, and for that answer, and for your, I don't want to use the word authenticity, for your forthrightness, I think is more that like you're telling really, really good and in some ways difficult truths, but they're personal to you, but it's not. The book is not an apology. It's not, and it's not a complaint. It's part of what makes what you've done with the book really powerful. It's like it could have been a complaint, and it could have been an apology. It could have been. I mean, it could have been this complaint. It could have been its apology. It could have been some sort of like this kind of philosophical breakdown research paper type thing. But there is this personal thread that runs all the way through, in which there is clearly you expose injury, and you talk about your own journey. But you are facing the reader the whole time and looking us dead in the face and telling the truths as you see them. I found it great. I think you're great, and I hope you find more and more room at more and more tables, because I think you add a ton to our culture as Christians and to our broader American culture. So thanks for doing what you do, and for spending some time with us.
Yeah, it was a great conversation. It didn't even feel like a podcast.
Well,
so
good. Awesome.
Yeah, so thanks for having me on, and I hope our paths cross soon.
Absolutely. Talk to you again soon. And of course, thank you for joining us on episode 8 of the Etsy podcast. You can discover more about Katelyn Beaty and what she's up to at KatelynBeaty.com. That's Katelyn, Katelyn, and Beaty is Beaty, KatelynBeaty.com. You can find out what we're up to, listen to past episodes, and check out some extras if you go to @cpodcast.com. And then looking for me personally online, you can always discover me at justmcroberts.com. I hope you're liking what we're doing with the podcast, and if you are, please leave us a positive review at iTunes. Until next time.